A new clinical trial to assess the potential risks and potential benefits of puberty-blocking drugs for children will be carried out by researchers at King's College London. Their use has been deeply controversial, and last year were restricted after a review by Dr. Hilary Cass found that there simply isn't enough clinical evidence available to show actually whether their use is a dangerous or a positive thing. Dominic Hughes is our health correspondent, and that, Dominic, is why really this research, this trial is happening now, to put solid scientific clinical evidence behind this.
Yes, good morning, Anna. Yeah, exactly that. So these puberty blockers, they're also known as puberty suppressing hormones. They're drugs that are used to delay or prevent puberty happening. Now, they were used to treat those young people who were questioning their gender and were diagnosed with either what's called gender incongruence, when someone's gender identity doesn't match the sex they were registered with at birth, or with gender dysphoria, when that causes significant distress. And the idea by those who supported the use of these drugs was it gave those young people and their families time to think, time to just pause the onset of puberty and give them time to consider what they wanted to do and to explore those questions around their gender. But as you said, their use was banned in the UK outside of clinical trials following this review that listeners might remember last year by Dr. Hilary Cass. And her review found there was insufficient evidence to say whether they were safe or not. And her review called for more research, and that's exactly what this new trial aims to do. As you say, there are very strongly held and polarised views about the risks or benefits of these drugs, delaying the onset of puberty. But this research, this clinical trial, which is one of a number of different studies, is going to involve around 226 children, they think, who are currently accessing gender services. They will have all reached puberty, but they'll be younger than 16. There's lots of very strict criteria that they have to meet. They also have to undergo intensive medical and psychological screening before they're allowed access to these puberty blockers. But the idea is then that they'll have ongoing support, and while they're on these puberty blockers, the trial is going to look at issues such as bone density, brain development, their mental health and their well-being. So this is really that effort to try and build the research base around the use of these drugs.
Dominic, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, Professor Emily Simonoff is Professor of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry at King's College London's Institute of Psychiatry, Psychology and Neuroscience, also the Chief Investigator in this study. Professor, good morning.
Good morning, Anna. Thanks for having me on.
It's really good to talk to you. And I think Dominic laid out very well there some of the issues that are going on around this, but your job now is to look at it through purely a scientific lens, not to prove or disprove anybody's theories that already exist, just to look at what impact these drugs have and whether they are a positive or a negative thing for young people.
That's exactly right, Anna, and Dominic put it very, very clearly. I think it's worth going back and saying, what do young people and parents ask us? Because Dominic highlighted those often strongly held views at either end, that these are clearly beneficial or clearly harmful. But right in the middle, young people and their parents who are attending services who have gender incongruence, which is the extreme end, the clinical diagnosis of gender distress, tell us that they don't know what to do. They look at what the information that's out there, and they don't know what's best for them. This study, alongside the other pathways studies, is really aiming to provide the same level of evidence for young people with gender incongruence as we provide for any other disorder for people attending NHS services.
Whatever conclusion you reach will be very heavily scrutinised, no doubt. So what are you putting in place to make sure that what you conclude is purely evidence-based? So people will look, for example, at the sample size, 220 or slightly over. Is that enough? They will look at the fact that there's clearly already a level of support from the young people and parents if they have chosen to take these drugs. So what are you putting in place to make sure that that evidence will stand up to the very rigorous scrutiny that it will get?
Yeah, that's a really important question. And one of those elements was, what is the sample size? And that's been chosen using the same kind of rules or indicators that we use for every other clinical trial to make sure the sample is large enough that we don't miss a true effect if it's present, and at the same time large enough that we don't conclude that there is a positive or beneficial effect when that isn't present. Those are set rules that our methodologists use for every single study. So we've used those same rules here. Of course, this study has gone through all the usual approvals and regulatory scrutiny, which involved the Human Research Authority and the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Agency, sometimes known as the MHRA. And there, the UK has very high levels of scrutiny of clinical trials to make sure that first they're properly conducted, but also in terms of how we think about the wide range of measures that Dominic highlighted. We're looking at young people's psychological state, emotional well-being, physical health, and quality of life, as well as any possible adverse effects here. So we're doing that in a very structured and standard way, and that's also been advised by people with lived experience, both people who have trans experience and also parents and caregivers who come from a diversity of experiences of gender diversity or gender incongruence. So it's a wide range of measures that will be very carefully monitored. The really important thing to understand here is that we're not expecting a one-size-fits-all finding necessarily. We're looking very much at the balance between possible benefits for mental health and quality of life and any possible risks or harms. Those might be to physical health. And also one of the really important things we're doing is looking at whether there are any possible risks to brain development by doing the first ever study looking at cognitive development, that's thinking, learning, and memory. And at the same time, scanning brains of young people who are getting puberty-suppressing hormones and those who are not. That's the first time that's ever been done.
We spoke to Dr. Hilary Cass about this, and she talked about the fact that her review had uncovered a very weak evidence base for the benefits, that some children had more negative than positive effects. And she is very pleased that this work is taking place. And she is actually very pleased that you and the team at King's College London are doing it. She says you're one of the best in the country for this kind of trial. But I wonder, just stepping away from the scientific element of it for one moment, and Dominic, as we said, explained very well the really strong feelings on both sides when it comes to this. And I wonder, just for you as a researcher, how does it feel to be taking something on that does come with an increased level of scrutiny? And also, we've seen at times in this debate as well that there can be abuse attached to people who take on work like yours.
I'm very proud to be the chief investigator for the Pathways study. I recognize it's an extremely important question. It's very important for the young people and their parents who are at the moment really uncertain what kind of healthcare to opt for. And what we hope is that the Pathways studies, the trial plus the wider studies that we're doing, will allow us to give young people experiencing gender incongruence and their families, as well as the doctors who are treating them, much better information about treatment moving forward.
Professor Emily Simonoff, the chief investigator of the study, thanks for your time this morning.